Welcome back, and back to our top story. President Trump planning to meet with Kim Jong-un in May of this year to discuss denuclearizing the North. Joining me right now to talk about the potential risks and rewards from such a sit-down, Ambassador John Bolton. He is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. Great to see you, sir. Thanks very much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
What do you think about this meeting?
Well, I think obviously the president's turned things on their heads as he does so often, and it's confused a lot of people in Washington. I think basically what he's saying, and he reiterated his thinking in his speech in Pennsylvania last night, is that with the North Koreans very close to achieving the objective they sought for so long of being able to target cities in the United States with nuclear weapons, it's time to cut through the usual diplomatic procedure and say we're prepared to talk right at the top. But I don't think this is the beginning of a 6-month, 9-month, 12-month process. I think this could actually could be a very short meeting, should be a very short meeting. The issue is, will North Korea denuclearize? And the way they can prove that is by agreeing to ship their nuclear weapons program to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is where, for example, the Libyan nuclear weapons program now sits. And if they're not willing to discuss that, there's not much to discuss.
Well, what are they willing to discuss, Ambassador? We've heard from them before in terms of saying we are not denuclearizing. We are not giving up our nuclear ambitions. Now, the administration will say the tough talk on the part of the president has actually brought them to the table to even consider it. Here's Stephen Mnuchin with me, the Treasury Secretary, this past week on Fox Business. Listen to this.
We believe that sanctions work. They worked in Iran. They've worked in North Korea. In my mind, one of the major reasons why they're coming to the table is because of the economic sanctions, and we're not going to change those sanctions. We will continue to put sanctions in place until they agree to fully denuclearizing the peninsula in something that we can hold them accountable for and verify.
Do you agree with that these sanctions have actually worked? Because some people say sanctions don't work. Why would a killer or someone who doesn't care about human rights care about sanctions?
Yeah. Well, let me go back to the premise for a minute. I don't think Kim Jong-un wants to engage in the kind of conversation with the president I just described. He wants negotiations. He wants conventional, months of preparation, months of discussion at the lower levels to buy him time to finish the still uncompleted tasks to get that deliverable nuclear weapons capability. He's trying to throw sand in our eyes, and I think the president isn't falling for that. And I'd have to say, I think sanctions have played, at best, a minor role. What has Kim Jong-un's attention, that he has not had his attention or his father's, is the threat that we will use military force to destroy his nuclear weapons program. I think he's scared to death of that. I think he's scared to death that Donald Trump actually means what he says, unlike Barack Obama, who could say all options are on the table like he was brushing his teeth. He just didn't mean it.
Yeah, well,
I think now they know it's serious.
But by the way, the Chinese don't like the military THAAD system either in that part of the world. So talk to us about China and how they view this. They're out this morning in one of the state newspapers saying China will not be marginalized in any talks. It's you can attribute the good news that they are perhaps talking to China. So what's your take on China's involvement?
Well, basically, China's jived us for 25 years. They've said repeatedly they don't want North Korea with nuclear weapons, and they've done precious little to change that. They could eliminate Kim Jong-un's regime very easily. I think, frankly, it's in China's own national interest to see the Korean Peninsula reunited. I think we should be having talks on that. I wish we had started a long time ago. But I think it's time to tell China, when we say we want denuclearization, we mean we want it now. And let's be clear. The difference between our current situation and prior diplomatic efforts is technological. North Korea is very close to accomplishing what it's been after. CIA Director Mike Pompeo has used the phrase recently that they're a handful of months away. So elaborate diplomatic negotiations, toughening sanctions boat by boat by boat, isn't going to do the trick.
Yeah, you know, you raise an interesting point. I want to ask you about Iran and how Iran fits in here, but let me stay on this for a moment, because we just heard from Kevin McCarthy, the majority leader, who's saying, look, we need to look at China. Peter Navarro as well, saying China is stealing all of our intellectual property. They're going to come out with something, this administration, in terms of getting their arms around what China has been doing to America for so long, whether it be tariffs or what have you. What do you want to see in terms of this next couple of weeks, what's going to be coming out of this White House against China as it relates to tariffs?
Well, I think, frankly, we'd get their attention better on North Korea if we were tougher on their violations of their international trade obligations. Let's just take intellectual property. I think American and European companies would say virtually unanimously that any technology they put into China is at risk of being pirated. And yet for years we've let them get away with it. China has pursued a mercantilist policy within the WTO, and for far too long they haven't been called on it. I think you get China's respect when you stand up to them. I think they, as long as they think Americans can be pushed around on trade, they surmise, not illogically, we can be pushed around on other things, too.
How does Iran fit into this North Korea story?
Well, I'm very worried that it fits in and go in the other direction. I've been saying recently North Korea is part of the Middle East. I think the linkages between Iran's ballistic missile program and North Korea's are indisputable, and I think there's every reason to believe that they're closely working together on the nuclear side as well. And even if that's completely wrong, the fact is in Iran you have a relatively rich country seeking nuclear weapons technology. In North Korea you have a desperately poor country that has nuclear weapons technology. Any trouble seeing the structure of that transaction? That's why North Korea is a threat, not simply in Asia and the Pacific. It is a global threat. It will sell that technology to anybody with cash to buy it.
Real is the FBI going to the FISA court and omitting important information, like the Democrats having paid for the dossier. What do you want to see happen here?
I want to see a second special counsel.
You do?
And I want it to be narrow, but I want to be outside the Department of Justice. Now, I have the greatest respect for the Inspector General. They do an amazing job. The problem is they will not have the authority, the subpoena authority, to really do the investigation. So when I look at this, the letter from, and I give a lot of credit to Chairman Goodlatte and Chairman Trey Gowdy, they sent a letter to Sessions, and his comments back were very positive. He said out of the respect of those two, he's taking a serious look at this. But take for one moment what just came out in the New Yorker just a couple days ago. Christopher Steele says he knew that the DNC and Hillary Clinton were paying for it. In the FISA application, the FBI said they did not know who was.
They lied.
Yeah. And how can you have a trust? Now, FISA court is different than any other court because you don't have another attorney in there to argue back and forth. This is going before, and this is surveilling American citizens. We can never make a mistake at this. Yeah. And I think there are enough questions, enough actions, and you have to take it out of the Department of Justice because there's current people sitting in there who actually signed these FISA applications. Let's make sure we have accountability, let's have trust, let's narrow it, and let's get a special counsel.
I'll tell you, Congressman, this really looks like an abuse of power. Are we going to see any accountability? I mean, is anybody actually going to get prosecuted for any of this?
I tell you, what we're walking through, and we want to go through the rule of the law. People are innocent till proven guilty, but there are so many questions here, and the more that we dwell into it, the more we get, and we have to pull the information out. I mean, what's so embarrassing to me and offensive to me in all respects, how many times have we asked the FBI before for this information, and they sat there and held it, instead of giving it to really, we are separate but co-equal. We have a right to know because we are the voice that the power is lent to us from the people to make sure the protections and accountability.
But what do you do? You've been stonewalled since last August.
Well, if you notice, we never stop. We continue to move forward. That's why the special counsel is the idea is coming out of the House. 2 Sessions, and I'm hopeful Sessions makes the right decision here.
Take us through the school safety bill. A lot of people talking about the fact that it doesn't include an age change. You know, there's not really any more pressure on gun owners. What is the school safety bill? What are you trying to achieve?
Well, remember what we have, and we got to take a step back here. So back in December, the Congress actually passed the Fix NICS bill. Remember what NIC is?
The national,
the National Instant Criminal Background Check. Because when you go back to the Texas shooting, Mr. Kelly down there, he never should have been able to have a weapon because he was dishonorably discharged for actually beating his wife. There were 2 offensives there. there that he never should have been able to go through. But our own military did not update it. So what we're looking at is updating, making sure these bad people cannot have guns. That is sitting over in the Senate. Now we're adding to it this week. We have a former sheriff of Jacksonville, Congressman Rutherford. He has stopped school violence. This is more for training within the schools to identify these individuals. Because look what the FBI did with this last shooter, Nicholas Cruz. 5 months prior, Nicholas Cruz goes on YouTube and puts in he wants to be a professional school shooter.
Right, and that was missed.
That was sent to the tip line of the FBI. They did research and said they couldn't find it. They never called YouTube. Then later, a family member called in concerned because his cruelty to animals, his recent death in the family, the way he was acting towards guns. They went back in and looked, knowing that they had just been given it a couple months prior, and then closed it out again. Both of these incidences should have never happened. We need to start enforcing what we have, but more importantly, we need to make sure the background checks are updated, and that's the bill we passed in December, and now we're adding to it with Stop School Violence. And the bill we're passing this week, the Sandy Hook Promise, they endorsed this bill as well.
Do you want to see teachers armed?
I think from a perspective, not force teachers to be armed, but if somebody has a concealed carry permit and others and trained, I want to see it. But more importantly, what I want to see if someone's given a tip that they're able to see it. I want to see that we prevent people that aren't supposed to have guns from getting them. And secondly, when I look at if there's a resource officer sitting on that campus, I don't want them hiding. I want them protecting these children like they're supposed to do and what they're hired to do.
And I know you're going to have the Judiciary Committee have the FBI come in and explain why these failures happened.
We just had the FBI, and they're calling them in again. They're looking at all these incidences because they should not have happened. Where is the failure? We got to make sure we correct it and find a solution.
A word on the economy, good numbers Friday.
Not just good, but great.
They were off the charts. I mean, it feels like a Goldilocks situation here. Not too hot, not too cold, because wages were up, but not as much as people thought.
You know what? When the president named it the Tax Cut and Jobs Bill, and when he cut the regulation, what a difference it makes from one new administration. The administration working with the Congress, all those regulations we cut, but what's really exciting in these tax cut bills, look at the numbers on these jobs. The number of participation. For the first time, we had 800,000 moving in. Look at the skilled labor. If you look at the skilled labor of the manufacturing, we have not seen these numbers since 1984, the best 3 months before. This is really making the difference. This is the beginning of America's comeback, and we want to continue that going forward.
Let me push back and say to you, this is not a mandate to spend more money, right? I mean, you just voted $300 billion in new spending. A lot of people wondering, where did the fiscal restraint of the Republicans go? I mean, is that going to cut into growth? What's your solution for trillion-dollar deficits?
Well, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is, because we've been passing these budgets and balancing them. Where we made the investment in the military. And rightfully so, because what had been cut for the last 8 years, looking at North Korea, looking at Russia, looking at China and the South China Seas and other, where we had to make a difference. But what's really grabbing all this money, and if you want to go back to 1984, in 1984, the mandatory spending only took 25%. That's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, interest on the debt. You know what it takes today? 69%.
Yes, I know that.
Congress acted.
We
made a reform in Obamacare. That's a whole new mandate that Obama laid on us. We tried to reform that. Unfortunately, we lost by 1 vote. That's why tomorrow's vote is so important. Do you want Nancy Pelosi back, where she's going to raise your taxes, expand more when it comes to spending, and that will actually break Medicare, it'll actually break Medicaid. We're protecting it for the future, but more importantly, making our economy stronger.
Real quick on technology, you mentioned YouTube. These companies have never been this powerful. Are we going to see new legislation, a bigger bite of regulation on the tech companies?
Look, I believe in the First Amendment, but think about this. When you're looking at how much Facebook controls, how much Facebook has on what you actually see, and when I'm looking at what's happening and knocking down conservative voices, I think this is a place that Congress should actually look at and make sure we have really a fair process and a free process going forward.
We're going to be watching that. It's great to see you, Majority Leader.
Thank you.
Kevin McCarthy joining us there. Let me start off with these talks, a huge gamble with a communist state that is hard to read. What are your thoughts on this meeting between the president and Kim Jong-un?
My first thought is, the way the president has handled this is correct. A lot of people didn't think that. He played rougher with China and rougher with North Korea. And there are risks, but there are greater risks not to have them. They're closer than ever before to be able to have that nuclear weapon and that ICBM to be able to hit the United States. So time is of the essence. But I think what has happened, the number of sanctions that we have passed in the House, the pressure that the President has put on, he moved 2 aircraft carriers off over there. That is having an effect, and I think it's right from this perspective of where this president's going. And remember, no sanctions are coming off, no change, and the president is saying you have to denuclearize if you want anything to happen.
Yeah, 1 year ago he said fire and fury.
Yes.
This country will be met with fire and fury if they make a wrong move, and it does feel like that tough talk was effective.
And the president is very clear. He's kept all options on the table. He cannot allow, from the perspective of Kim Jong-un, to have a nuclear weapon that can hit the United States or to proliferate and sell that everywhere across the world.
So do you want action before the meeting? I mean, they're not going to denuclearize before the meeting.
No, but they're not going to have any more tests. But I think we've got to continue to keep the pressure on and just put the pressure on China as well to make sure this needs to have a change.
Let me move on to another subject here at home. We've got a big election coming up this Tuesday, the special election in Pennsylvania. Do you view that as a proxy to the midterm elections?
I don't view it as a proxy because if you take that perspective, there's already been 5 special elections and Republicans have won all 5 of those.
Oh.
Now, this is a little unique situation because in Pennsylvania, what the Democrats did, and this is really Barack Obama and others, they've gone and they politically redrew the lines. So whoever turns out and wins in tomorrow's election, they'll no longer have a seat right there. They'll have to run someplace else. And I hope the Supreme Court takes a look at that and puts a stay on this position of redrawing these lines politically. But in this race, the intensity level is a little higher with Democrats. But if you look at everybody in there, the low propensity, especially on a special election, if everybody turned out, we would win by 10 or 12 points. But this is a very tight race going in. And the number one question should be, do you want another person added to Congress that's going to be another vote for Nancy Pelosi to become Speaker? Because that is what she's doing around the country. That's her desire to be able to be there, to go back. And what did the Democrats propose just last week? To remove all the tax cuts that have spurred our economy's growth and raise the taxes on you. So that's the real question come tomorrow. So everybody needs to turn out. And Rick Saccone, not only is a veteran, he's an expert when it comes to North Korea. He would be a great addition in Congress, and he'd help us in a time that we actually need the help the most.
The president has been saying, look, we need more Republicans in the House, in the Senate, because we need to get these policies passed. Now Nancy Pelosi's walking back the whole crumbs statement, saying, oh, we all like when people get bonuses. But do you think that hangs over the Dems come November?
Well, I think
comments like that?
It does, because when I go across the country, Andy Barr was telling me a story where he went across doing a listening session. There was a guy in Kentucky who says, I'm getting $50 more a month. That's more than $500 a year. And all on his own, he says, you tell Nancy that's not a crumb from where I come from.
Wow, yeah.
It's the respect and honor, but the way she treats people. And the thing is, not only does she think they're crumbs, she's going to repeal the tax bill. She's going to raise your taxes. And tomorrow, people have an ability to say no to that.
Going into the November elections, you have the wind at your back. Certainly the Republicans with the tax legislation passed, the rollback in regulations. But now we have this issue of tariffs. 100 of your colleagues have sent a note to the White House, to the president, asking him to rescind these tariffs on aluminum and steel. Where do you stand on this? Have you spoken with the president about it? I mean, this is an issue that has divided the party, got everybody from corporate CEOs to the Wall Street Journal editorial board talking about this being a bad idea.
Well, we've talked to the president about a lot of this. And it's not unusual to hear the president say this, because he's been saying it for 30 years. He campaigned on this. And from one perspective, the president will say, I campaign and I'm trying to keep a promise. But it also shows the president's listens. Because look at what the final version came out. He gave exemptions. So Canada, the person that we import the most from, exempted. Mexico. He just said Australia. It could be our allies. Because the real problem here, the president is correct. China produces the most steel and aluminum. 49% of steel, 53% aluminum.
But not direct, right?
Not direct, but they subsidize it. And they're flooding the world market. That is a problem. Now, we only take 1% in. So this really is a message to China by giving the exemption and others. Nobody wins in a trade war. I believe in free and fair trade, and I get concerned about this, but I think a lot of this discussion and what's happening right now has a little more to do with NAFTA, but also think the pressure that it's putting on China when it comes to steel and aluminum when you're trying to have a negotiation about North Korea. I think it may wake them up a little bit.
Going into the Pennsylvania special election, the president's going to rile up all of these people who are right in steel country. So it was the timing, obviously, not a coincidence, I guess. But let me ask you about the China story. We're going to speak to Peter Navarro coming up. What do we do about China? Because you've said it, Paul Ryan has said it, you'd like to see something more surgical. Is that what you mean when you say surgical, that you want to see something direct against China?
Well, if we're going after China, let's not punish our friends.
Right.
The other point you have to remember, too, there's thousands of more jobs that manufacture utilizing the steel and aluminum than those that actually make
exactly.
the steel
6.5 million jobs of those
It's 5% of the GDP when you're doing less than 1%. So that's a fear. That's why you do not want to get in a trade war either with this. And that's why they also allowed the Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, to exempt products as well. So there's a lot of exemptions here, and I take that as the president's willingness to listen to us in Congress and listen to business, because we've got an economy moving like we have not seen since the 80s, and we're beginning the America comeback. And I think this will actually, from the point of having the exemptions, help us in some part and make sure we do not get into trade war.
So what can you get done before the elections? I mean, in the next block, we're going to talk about the school safety bill that's moving in Congress, as well as these great economic numbers. Is there anything you see getting done before the November elections, aside from that? I mean, what about, like, for example, NAFTA? Would you expect a new NAFTA deal within 20 days before the Mexico elections?
I would like to see a NAFTA deal done now.
Yeah.
And remember, it's just not America that has to do it,
right.
Canada, Mexico as well. But this is what the president's trying to get done and make it happen now. Opioid reform. We did the CARE Act in the last Congress, but you're going to find the mortality age has dropped twice in the last 2 years in America, on the verge of dropping a third time. This has not happened in quite some time. All regards opioids. Infrastructure, rebuilding our infrastructure.
Without Gary Cohn, you can get infrastructure done.
Very much so. Yeah. And then think about the punishment, as you know so well, of Dodd-Frank. The ability for capital, for small businesses, especially those minority-owned businesses. This is our ability to reform that. We've passed a bill inside the Choice Act in Congress. The Senate is proposing as well. This is only going to build on the economy to go further.
All right, let's talk more about what you're going to get done in these next 6 months. Then there's this, the FISA story. Will there be a special second counsel appointed to investigate the alleged FISA court abuse? Congressman McCarthy is back for more on that after this short break. Follow me on Twitter.
I love that speech. The only thing better than watching it on TV is when you're actually in one of those arenas. It was vintage Donald J. Trump.
He was having fun with that, for sure. Well, let's go through some of the pushback on these tariffs, because on the one hand, nobody wants a trade war. That's only going to take away from economic growth. Number two, why are we saving industries that have 140,000 workers versus the industries that input aluminum and steel, some 6.5 million jobs? And then there's the retaliation effort. Europe is saying they're going to do a 25% tariff. Is that a fact? Do we know that Europe is going to impose a 25% tariff on U.S. goods?
A lot of stuff there to unpack, Maria. But let's start with the Europe issue. As the president said last night, we run a trade deficit of about $150 billion a year with Europe. I mean, some analysts calculate that for every $1 billion in trade deficit we have, that's 6,000 jobs we lose. And so a $150 billion trade deficit with Europe means we're sending over 1 million jobs to Europe, and we're buying their cars, and that's not fair and reciprocal trade. I think that the broader debate here is simply that what the president is saying is that we're free traders. We have the lowest combination of tariffs and non-tariff barriers in the world. All we get out of that is massive trade deficits that ship off our wealth, ship off our jobs, and the president says no mas. Now, in the case of steel and aluminum, it's a really special case because these industries, as the president has said, are pillar industries of our economy and national defense and national security. We can't have a country, as the president said, without those industries. So from a purely national security point of view, that's why we're acting on steel and aluminum. And by the way, the president started talking about these specific actions in Pittsburgh in the summer of 2016. So having him give that speech last night brought everything full circle.
Okay, but the question about Europe, do you think they're going to see a 25% tariff? Are they going to institute that as a result of this?
So on the broader issue of retaliation, let's be very serious, but also be very calm about it. Let's think about what happened in January when the president levied tariffs on solar of 30% and washing machines of up to 50%. What happened there? There was no retaliation. What happened was a flood of new investment from South Korea and other countries into this country so that they would build the factories here rather than there, and we will build washing machines and solar panels with American hands, and that will create American jobs. So that's the response that we've had in the real world. The other thing, Maria, look, every country in the world, we've been Uncle Sucker. I mean, we have these large trade deficits simply because we're an open market. All we're looking for is fair and reciprocal trade. And I think our allies at the end of the day will understand that all we're doing here is defending two key industries so that we can come and help with their defense when they need us.
So I'm looking at the list of trade deficits in 2017. China, $375 billion. European Union, $151 billion. Japan, $69 billion. Germany, $64 billion. Mexico, $71 billion. Ireland, $38 billion. All deficits.
It's
but
extraordinary.
The Wall Street Journal editorial board, who we're going to hear from later on in the program, says that doesn't matter. Trade deficits don't matter. And if, in fact, it impacts economic growth negatively, then it matters a lot in a bad way.
Sure. Trade deficits matter huge, and there's a couple ways to think about it. As I said, $1 billion in deficit by some analysts' account, that's 6,000 jobs lost. When you calculate what the impact of the Chinese deficits, that's over 2 million jobs we export to them through the trade deficit. I love Warren Buffett's analysis, which is over a decade old now, where he talks about something called conquest by purchase. If we basically run a $500 billion a year deficit every year, and that accumulates to trillions over the last decade, what that does is it's like a reverse mortgage. You can think about basically the foreigners coming here and buying up our companies, our land, and our assets. And I care about the children who are going to inherit this country. And we're not going to have a country if we keep running these deficits and we don't have an aluminum and steel industry.
Isn't that what China is doing? They're acquiring our intellectual property. They're stealing it in some cases. They're buying up companies with expertise in things like AI, robotics, then doing it themselves and then competing with us. Why not go straight away at China? Do something specific against China rather than the entire aluminum and steel industry?
So on the chessboard, we have to defend our steel and aluminum industries. No question about it for national security, and it's not a China problem. We got 20 countries flooding our borders with steel and 15 with aluminum. We need to defend against all those countries.
So what's the China
Maria,
problem then?
You hit it right on the head. China is a very bad actor when it comes to trade practices across a lot of things, but nothing's more important in the near term than addressing the theft of our intellectual property and the forced technology transfer of our technologies. And when a company like Ford or GM goes over to China, they have to surrender their technology in order to get access to the market. Now, the president says that's not going to happen anymore. He's directed Ambassador Robert Lighthizer, one of my favorite guys in Washington, toughest guy I know, to come up with a plan that we will be releasing shortly to address that head on. So for all those both inside the Beltway and outside who are saying, let's get China, we're going to address that problem head on, because there's no, look, I think there's going to be wide agreement throughout this country that China should not be stealing our intellectual property and technologies or forcing their transfer. And when we run the deficits with them, they go to places like Silicon Valley, flush with American dollars, and they buy up those startup companies that are on the cutting edge of artificial intelligence, robotics, and everything we're going to need. If we don't have the industries of the future, we don't have a future.
Real quick, we have 30 seconds here. Are you going to get a NAFTA deal done? I mean, the next 20 days, then you've got the Mexican elections. Should we, if this whole tariff was about NAFTA and you didn't get a deal done in the next 20 days, was it worth it? When will a new NAFTA deal happen?
Ambassador Robert Lighthizer, come back to him. He's a very tough negotiator, and it's his lane. The president wants to get this done. He wants to get it done.
All right.
And we hope it gets done.
We got to
jump. Great day for America.
Peter Navarro, good to see you, sir.
Take care, Maria.